and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, Rishi Sunak's refused to rule out letting Nigel Farage into the Conservative Party during an exclusive phone-in on LBC. The Prime Minister was asked about the threat of Reform UK following a number of opinion polls putting them ahead or just behind the Tories.
I'm focused on winning this election. I'm not interested in anybody else. All I'd say is a vote for anyone else, including Reform, is just making it more likely that Keir Starmer's in number 10.
He also insisted he's energised on the campaign trail and believes the Tories can still win the election. Elsewhere, Labour's again said its focus is on growing the economy. The SNP's been laying out its manifesto championing independence. Reform wants to improve NHS efficiency and the Lib Dems want to spend more on hospital repairs. A 7-month-old baby girl died after being attacked by a dog in Coventry on Sunday. Police say the animal isn't classed as a dangerous breed. A 17-year-old boy's been jailed for at least 16 years for murdering a teenager on a dance floor at a party. Charlie Cossa, also 17, was stabbed in Warnham in West Sussex last summer. And orange powder has been thrown over Stonehenge. 2 people have been arrested. Just Stop Oil say they were responsible. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed up 13 points at 82.05. The pound buys $1.27 and €1.18. LBC weather, rain in the far north clearing, dry elsewhere tonight and a low of 5 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. It's Wednesday's Cross Question. It's 2 minutes past 8. With me on the panel, to my right, Baroness Susan Kramer, Liberal Democrat peer, who's the party's Treasury spokesperson in the House of Lords. Next to her is Rachel Wearmouth, political journalist for the I newspaper. To my left, Ribeiro-Addy, who's a Labour candidate in the election. And next to her, Samuel Kasumu, social entrepreneur, who was a civil society advisor to Boris Johnson when he was Prime Minister. They are gagging to answer your questions, basically. So get your fingers dialing, 0345 6060 973. I don't know why I say dialing, because nobody dials nowadays, do they? You can WhatsApp us on the same number, text 84850, and do watch us on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Right, let's go to our first question. It's from Janice in Plymouth. It's a text question. What can Rishi Sunak do or say now to win in 2 weeks' time? Now, there's a challenge for you, Belle.
Oh, nothing. Absolutely nothing. There is nothing I think he can now do.
So you think victory is certain?
I don't believe we should take anybody for granted, but I think it's very clear from what we can see in the polls. And actually, from the past few years, everybody has just had enough with the Conservative Party and their leadership of this country. They will do anything to get rid of them, and I think that's being reflected in the way in which we see people talking, the polls, and the way in which we know people are eventually going to vote. But we are out there, or I'm sure all other parties are out there fighting for every single vote.
Without being too sort of party political about it, what are you hearing on #Labour Doorstep? What are the issues that are really coming up that you think? Give me the top 3 things that people are saying to you.
Even if they're not saying that they're voting Labour, they're saying they're definitely not voting Tory. That is the top thing. They're completely sick of the Tories. That's the second thing. And the third thing is that they believe that we need change.
Very on message. Unusually so, if I may say so.
It just happens to be exactly what they're saying.
Samuel Kasumu, you used to advise number 10 when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister. What would you be advising them now?
I'd probably be telling them it's too late. But where I do agree with...
That's not earning your salary.
Well, I mean, it's all about telling the truth, to give them advice.
You're not on the payroll, though, are you?
No, I'm not. I think the reality is, we have an election in just over 2 weeks' time. People do want change. I'd agree with Belle on that. And at the moment, there isn't really a clear alternative to what we're probably going to have come July the 4th. I don't think people are enthusiastic about Labour or Keir Starmer.
So do you mean there's not a clear alternative to the Tories?
No, I think, yes.
So you're trying to say that Labour are like the Tories?
Well, that's what a lot of my listeners think.
Is that what you want me to say about
No, that is not what I want you to say at all.
I think the reality is, look, we've had a pandemic, war in Ukraine, etc., etc. People do genuinely want change.
Yeah.
And unfortunately for me and the Conservatives, I don't think what we're offering right now is what people are looking to buy. In fact, I don't think people are listening to the offer that we're putting forward. But that doesn't mean that people are completely enthusiastic about Keir Starmer being the Prime Minister. I don't even think you are. If you're going to be really honest about Keir Starmer being the Prime Minister come July the 4th.
I want Keir Starmer to be the Prime Minister come July the 4th.
Because he's the only alternative right now.
He is the leader of the Labour Party. I want Labour to win, and that's exactly what I hope is going to happen.
Controversial.
Fair enough.
But, Samuel, I mean, as a committed Conservative, you wanted to stand for Mayor of London. Are your loyalties being tested at the moment?
Yeah, I think the reality is there are three types of Conservatives right now. The first are people who are, who have checked out mentally. So they've either gone to Reform, some, yes, have gone to Labour, but a lot feel very politically homeless and angry. And then you have folks who are trying to convince themselves that they're in denial. Because I think we all know what's going to happen come July 4th, and they have to do that if you're a parliamentary candidate or you're running.
So that's the cabinet.
Yeah, or if you're part of their campaign team, and then you've got the third, which are people who are trying their best to not rock the boat before July the 4th, and I think those people become very vocal. The Conservative Party has had 14 years of power, and people want change. We haven't had a great campaign, and a period of renewal is going to be inevitable, in my opinion.
Susan Kramer.
I've never seen as many people thinking through and totally engaged in tactical voting before. I think it's extraordinary. If ever you want a message that we need PR, it's to see how everybody's trying to do a do-it-yourself PR this time around. I find on the doorstep, you speak to people and the first thing they say is, I just want to be clear who's going to get the Tories out here. And if that's you, I'm voting for you.
I'm sorry to disagree with you there. Actually, the last time I heard people talk a whole lot about tactical voting was in 2010. And a lot of people I know who were talking about tactical voting wanted to vote Lib Dem to keep the Tories out. And by voting Lib Dem, they ended up getting the Tories.
Well, it's not what I'm hearing today. I can absolutely assure you
were
of
just
that.
saying that it was people were talking more.
Never seen it on
what
this.
kind of people do that? Because I always think, and I may be wrong in this, I think tactical voting is a very sort of middle-class pursuit. Am I wrong?
I've certainly heard it from people who come from all kinds of backgrounds. I mean, I don't just campaign, and neither do my colleagues in, the streets that look like middle class. We campaign all across.
You won't pay for Richmond Park. That's all there is in Richmond Park.
Let me tell you, sometimes it's very tough to be someone on a low income in what is overall a well-heeled community because you don't have the facilities. Yeah. So you really are on those doorsteps, and you really are doing the constituency work in those homes. But that's basically what I'm picking up. Is, who will get them out? And you try and go on to a topic and say, well, can I talk about the manifesto? No, that's what we want to do is, and the word is change, quite frankly, but whoever looks the most likely, that's where they are. I also think for the first time, people are feeling very comfortable voting Liberal Democrat, and that was probably not true in the last two elections.
You can say that about Labour. They're more comfortable about voting Labour now than they would have been in 2019, for obvious reasons.
Well, when they talk to me, they tend to talk about liberal democracy, obviously.
Rachel, now, as an independent observer of this, do you think the game's up for Rishi Sunak? Is there anything he can do to change things?
I think there's not really anything he can do at this point other than what he's doing, I think, which is to stop offending people, stop making far too many waves, essentially, because he's facing a very volatile electorate, one which is cutting into his vote from the Liberal Democrat side and from the Labour side, and he's also got Reform on his hands as well. So I think he's trying to keep a quieter campaign. For example, today he didn't go straight in on attacking Nigel Farage, and I think that was probably quite a good judgment, actually. Try and keep a quieter campaign and just take some of the anger that's coming his way. I think that's part of his job at the moment.
Did you listen to his hour with Nick Ferrari?
I did.
And what did you make of it?
I think that you saw someone who was just taking all of the anger coming at him, really, and just trying to get his way through it without making too many mistakes. But the anger is palpable there. I mean, I've covered elections since about 2010, and the noticeable difference at this one is just how angry people are.
Yeah.
But people feel contempt towards politics generally, and trust is really, really, really very low. And there's probably not much you can do as an incumbent leader in those circumstances.
So not a very positive message for Rishi Sunak from our panel. A WhatsApp question here from Stuart in Shropshire. Why, according to both Labour and the Conservatives, is tax such a dirty word? Personally, it's so obvious that spending needs to rise. I'm very happy to pay more tax to help fix the country. I've had a lot of people say this, particularly on tax that we've had over the past couple of weeks, saying, well, yeah, obviously we'd quite like to pay less tax, but we just want things to work. Is that what you're hearing on the doorstep, Susan?
It actually hasn't come up on the doorstep, but mostly I think when you try and engage with people and sort of push the issue, it becomes very clear that so many people are feeling utterly squeezed by the cost of living. I mean, they really are. That feeling down, that even the inflation figures that came today, they finally worked out that still means that prices are going to keep rising. Yeah. They're looking at higher energy bills when we get into the winter period, and they don't know how they're going to make this work. So I mean, that's why in my party we've made a very deliberate point of looking at people who can pay more. That for example, the big digital and social media companies who've been rather let off the hook. That the banks who've had their levy cancelled, put that back on. The oil and gas companies had so many loopholes in their windfall tax, now pull those in. So when you start looking at those parts of the economy where people aren't paying their fair share, this is the time to make sure they pay their fair share, rather than, I think, going back to the people who are feeling these enormous cost of living pressures.
The rich are apparently paying 60% of all tax at the moment. It's up from 50% 10 years ago. So you could argue that the Conservatives have put taxes out for the better off.
I would accept some of that argument, except where you've seen that the freezing of thresholds, you're seeing people on very low incomes dragged into paying tax who never had to pay tax before, simply because of the effect of inflation on that tax threshold. And then you've got people being dragged into higher taxes. I mean, I think there are people on fairly regular nursing salaries that have now been dragged into the high tax threshold. So I'd be very careful about, insisting that the burden is really falling on the very wealthy people. We're actually getting lots of pockets of people who are being very, very impacted by the changes that Rishi Sunak.
Interesting to see you might agree with the reform policy where they want to put the tax threshold up to 20,000, so you wouldn't pay anything until you earned £20,000.
Well, you know that back in the coalition years, that we were the ones that forced the increase in the tax threshold, and in fact are castigated constantly by Conservatives for doing that, because they thought the tax break should be at the top, not at the bottom. But you also have to be completely realistic about how bad our fiscal situation is today, and work within that envelope, quite frankly. So that means that things you would love to do, you cannot sit there and now tell people you're going to do them. You just haven't the scope.
I mean, for the sake of balance, I think the tax threshold continued to go up even under the Conservatives after 2015, when the Liberal Democrats were no longer in the government. We spend £1.2 trillion a year on our public services, yet for various reasons, people feel like our public services still aren't working.
They're not.
No, yeah, that's it. They're definitely not working.
I mean, I was having this conversation the other day. I have never called a GP or my GP on a particular day and not gotten an appointment that day.
Wow,
now,
where's your GP?
I have to say, nor have I. However, that is not the experience of the majority of people.
Exactly. And so I think there is. It's often very easy to make blanket statements when actually the situations are often very nuanced, and there might be pockets or specific areas that need more investment. But nonetheless, that is how people feel. I think we're in a situation where people want, European level public services, but a lot of people also would like probably closer to American-style taxation, and that tension is why we often find ourselves in this moment. And also, we are at a point where we are being taxed at levels that we haven't seen for a generation, and so the challenge is, how do we grow the economy? And I know that's some of the things that Keir has been saying. To be honest with you, I would have liked to have heard more of that from Rishi Sunak.
Why would you have liked to have heard more? Oh, okay, from Rishi Sunak.
I don't care about Keir.
Don't be so quick to judge,
but from Rishi Sunak, because I think, look, inflation is down, that's great, but the only way that we're going to have better public services is if we grow our economy, and that's how we're going to be able to invest more. The other alternative is, of course, to tax more, and I think actually I'd push back on the idea of increasing taxes anywhere right now. But I think we have to focus on trying to grow for us to spend more on our public service.
Rachel,
I think you see. I think I would agree with a lot of what's been said, really, that it's a very high tax environment and people just do not have they don't want to listen to any policies on new taxes, particularly before an election. They always say they'd be prepared to pay more, but then when you actually ask them to go and put an X in the box to vote for that and, to make the NHS better or what have you, that they just always definitely vote against.
But has it been a win for the Conservatives to switch the agenda to tax over the past 10 days or so?
I think it's because...
It's not showing in the polls, is it?
It's not shown in the polls, but it is historically a problem for Labour. And when I was visiting Penny Mordaunt's seat and Jeremy Hunt's seat with the Conservatives' core vote, that is what comes up, that they're worried about taxes going up. So it is an effective election message for the Conservatives.
Belle?
Scaremongering. I think that what the Tories have done is they don't have any good policies to put out there, so then they start with the Labour are going to make you pay loads more tax. They make you pay loads more tax. It's a really silly framing.
When you don't get clear answers to tax questions from Labour politicians, you can understand why people continue asking the question.
Do you know what? It works out as Labour's fiscal plan is about 0.2% of GDP, whereas the Conservatives' one is 0.6%. And we know how they've spent the money over the past 14 years. They've just basically wrecked our economy entirely. So now it should be very clear to everybody that if you're a working person, you're going to do better under Labour. And when we are talking about taxing and talking about progressive taxation, we're talking about the super rich. We're talking about people that have been, given so many opportunities by the Conservatives to get out of paying tax. There are so many loopholes. There are so many loopholes that I feel that have been created under the Conservatives. Every single time we have a budget, there always seems to be something in there that's put in just for their mates who have loads of money.
The reality is, you try and tax a billionaire more, right? I know you now have some billionaires who are supporting the Labour Party, so well done on that. And they will just move to Monaco or whatever tax haven. The reality
they already are.
They already are. In fact, I read recently the number of millionaires who have departed the UK for
9,500 last year. It's the second highest number of any country in the world, apart from China is the leading one, where millionaires have left the country. Now, some people will cheer that. I think it's really worrying.
Yeah, it's just not sustainable. It's just not a sustainable argument or position to say we are going to get more money from folks who are very good at trying to avoid paying tax.
It's not just individuals. It's also corporations that are getting away without paying their fair share of tax.
Yeah, but I mean, again, if you're based offshore, you can't legally force people to not be creative of how they pay their tax. I'm not saying it's right, but I'm saying we have to be very honest about the
situation. Surely you could change the rules about whether or not how they're operating in the country and how they pay tax.
And then they'll choose
which is
to
what
do
we keep
business
asking.
elsewhere.
We kept asking the Conservatives to do.
And
which George Osborne did do quite a bit when he was Chancellor.
There you go.
More than Gordon Brown, to be fair.
I think the reality is taxes will go up under Labour, because if you don't do that, you're going to have to cut some expenditure on public services, which is something that is not palatable for Labour.
It is a very, very poor framing of it, I think, to say that.
I mean, this is economic facts.
No.
But it's also a difficult space for Rishi Sunak, because you've got the fiscal drag coming in for years ahead, so it's hard for him to stand on that platform and make that argument at the same time.
And you talk about Gordon Brown and you talk about investment for growth. I think he got...
no, we were talking about tax avoidance.
Well, no, you were. But then you mentioned Gordon Brown, and I think to myself, he gets a really bad rap. We have to remember that when the Tories were complaining about how much he had borrowed, the reason why their first few years went well is because he borrowed and he invested for said growth, and that.
Just take you back to something you said a moment ago. You said the phrase working person. What is a working person? Because it seems to be... Rachel Reeves had a bit of difficulty in defining that earlier today.
A working person is somebody who works.
So do I count as a working person, or am I super rich? Or can you be both?
No. obviously you work and you pay taxes.
Yes, I do. Let's make that clear.
Yeah, and so you are a working person. I think when people use the frame working person, they're talking about your average working person, because the majority of the population don't earn what you earn, I expect. I don't know what your wages are. Sorry, I didn't go and have a...
No, you're not I'm not even going to tell you in the break.
So I think Labour are talking about wealth taxes on inheritance. They're going to be talking about taxes on second homes. They're going to be talking about perhaps corporation tax at some point. Whichever way we slice the pie, taxes will be going up.
The Tories are trying to make it sound like we're trying to impose additional taxes on your average person.
In 2 weeks' time, our opinions won't really count for much anyway.
Well, no, actually,
but the reality is taxes will go up.
That's not true. You're going to be the opposition.
Thanks.
And the opposition.
But can you admit, live on LBC that can you hand on heart say that you believe taxes will not go up if or when Keir Starmer becomes Prime Minister?
I do not believe that taxes will go up for your average working person, no.
For your average working person. Okay.
Which covers a multitude of sins.
It covers a multitude of people, and that's the point.
Well, it does.
Yeah.
We will take more of your calls in just a moment. Keep them coming. 0345 6060 973. It's 21 minutes past 8.
This is LBC.
Apply.
Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
22 minutes past 8. Baroness Susan Kramer from the Liberal Democrats is here. Samuel Kasumu, former Conservative advisor to Boris Johnson. Well, he's still a Conservative, but just not an advisor anymore. Ribeiro-Addy, no one could say that she's former anything. She's a Labour candidate. And Rachel Wearmouth is a political journalist for the I newspaper. Let's go to Kevin in Basingstoke. Hi, Kevin.
Hello, Ian. My question is, why do Reform UK receive so much coverage in the media, especially compared to parties like the Greens or Liberal Democrats? And I would describe a working person as somebody that has to go to work to pay their bills.
That's the best description I've actually heard from anybody on that. So well done on that, Kevin. Why do Reform UK receive so much media coverage? I mean, I've got certain views on this, but let's go to our panel. Rachel, you are a member of Her Majesty's or His Majesty's media.
Yeah, indeed. It's a good question, and I understand some of the frustrations. I guess it's because Brexit is one of those factors that was popular for a long time, and Nigel Farage was part of that campaign.
That wouldn't come into any media organisation's thoughts as to how much interview time to allow reform, though.
I mean, there are broadcast rules, right, in terms of how much you have to give certain parties. But I think beyond that as well, it's just he's always a good story, right? You know, he always brings news and viewing figures to the organisation that or whichever broadcaster he appears with. So there's a logic to it there, I think. But I do understand the frustrations when you see the polls and then smaller parties not always represented.
Susan?
Well, you can understand that I feel frustrated about it, and I'm sure that Rachel is right. It's that they think it's a good media story, so we cover a good media story. And, sometimes really important politics doesn't have a lot of fanfare and flourish around it. Most people want common sense. That's never going to hit a headline, is it? And you see what Ed has had to do, which is, he enjoys it. He has no sense of self-importance, but he does the stunts because that brings the cameras, and when the cameras come, he talks about the policy, and it gives that opening. But isn't that a very odd way to have to conduct yourself in order to get a reasonable shake at media coverage?
He doesn't have to do it.
Well, if he doesn't do it, then the question is, would the cameras come? We went through how many years, even when being basically finding it near impossible to get any media focus. I think the Greens probably are in the same position, which is the big newspapers are outriders for one of the two major parties.
Why is it?
Broadcast tries to be fairer, but tends to follow an agenda that's set very often by those newspapers. And so cutting through is something that's extraordinarily difficult to do. I think it would be better politics.
That Ed Davey isn't doing an hour-long sit-down interview and phone in on LBC like Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer have?
The honest answer is I don't have a clue.
But you can't complain about lack of media coverage, and then when we offer him the opportunity for a whole hour of broadcast time, and they won't do it.
So the answer is I do not know. But I'm just talking about, you could look at this over weeks and months.
The election, there's still 2 weeks to go, so we live in hope. But it's very frustrating from a sort of, not just from us, but other broadcasters' point of view, when you hear this complaint for the Liberal Democrats, and then maybe you don't sort of always get the cooperation.
Well, I would say that you're one of the most impartial and fairest of the presenters that I've ever met, Ian. I think you put yourself in a very good space.
I've had Nick Clegg, Tim Farron, Joe Swinson all do this during the election.
But I was going to say, it's not always true elsewhere.
This may be true. Belle?
I think it's because, as you've heard, sensationalism, the media want a story, and because the Tories are boring them at the moment, I think. And so they need somebody to talk about on the right. One of the descriptions I've heard as to what the Conservatives are doing at the moment is that they don't seem to really want to win because they haven't got much to say and they're not really putting on any sort of a show. So when the right is vacant, people go to Reform. And that's exactly what's happening with votes, as well as the media, it seems.
Samuel?
I think Conservatives do have a lot to say. It's just that people bluntly have stopped listening. And let's just be honest about that. And after July the 4th, that hopefully will be an opportunity for us to regroup and for us to, re-engage with folks who are no longer listening. In terms of Nigel Farage, there's two things. Firstly, his box office. He is probably the most consequential politician of his generation.
Yeah, unfortunately for all of us.
Boris Johnson is probably number two, but not, I wouldn't say a close number two right now. And so when he speaks, it's important for people to listen because he represents the views of a lot of people who feel very alienated from the political class right now.
But would you welcome Nigel Farage back into the Conservative Party?
I think he is actively and has actively been trying to destroy the Conservative Party, and so I'm not sure if it makes sense for somebody who is behaved in such a way to then come in and potentially, be a very imposing character within that stable. I think we've got a big enough character in Boris Johnson. I can't see a Conservative Party with Boris in the shadows and Nigel essentially there in the flesh in the House of Commons pulling the strings. I think it'd probably be a disaster. Having said that, there will probably need to come a moment when there is some form of joining of forces within the right, because that's probably going to be the only way that we're going to be able to command a decent number of MPs in the House of Commons.
None of you have mentioned the real reason why Reform are getting so much coverage, because they're standing in, I think, around 600 seats. Yeah. And if you stand candidates in that many seats, you have an automatic right to be covered. Just under broadcasting regulations, let alone fairness. So I think that is the predominant reason. But you're all also right that Nigel Farage, it doesn't matter what he says, he says it in a way that people want to report, because he says it in an interesting way, in a way that I'm afraid certain frontbenchers from certain parties don't. It's as simple as that, isn't it?
He's a disruptor, isn't he? Yeah. And there's a question for the media generally: is it should maybe be asking if he's very, very serious about politics. You know, I mean, we had
he's committed to 5 years, isn't he?
We had an interview in the iPaper this week where he was asked about his tax policies, and he was just kind of ambivalent about them, asked if they were very deliverable, and intimated that he didn't really have any idea. and you know, so he's not really doing very serious politics.
I wonder if he's read his contract with you.
Quite, yeah.
Just to tell you, this time tomorrow from 8 o'clock, we are going to be holding a youth hustings where we have representatives from 5 political parties. Actually, one of them hasn't confirmed their person yet, but 5 political parties, all aged 21 or under. I think it's going to be one of the best debates of the campaign, but tune in at 8 o'clock tomorrow to find out. We'll take more of your calls to our panel in just a moment. It's 8:30 on LBC. Let's get the latest news headlines from Daryl Jackson.
The Prime Minister insists he is energised on the campaign trail and believes the Conservatives can win the election. During an exclusive phone-in with LBC, Rishi Sunak insisted the only poll that matters is on July the 4th. A 7-month-old baby girl has died in hospital after being bitten by her family's pet dog. Officers were called to a home in Coventry on Sunday afternoon. And 2 people have been arrested after Stonehenge was targeted with orange powder paint. The Prime Minister's described it as a disgraceful act of vandalism, while the Labour leader branded the protest as pathetic. LBC weather: rain in the far north clearing, dry elsewhere tonight and a low of 5 degrees.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
It's 8:33 on LBC. We have with us in the studio Liberal Democrat peer Susan Kramer, Samuel Kasumu, social entrepreneur, Ribeiro-Addy, Labour candidate, and Rachel Wearmouth, political journalist for the I newspaper. Our next question is a text question from Joshua in Chelmsford. Is it fair to Rishi Sunak to say his government has got there when it comes to inflation falling? Has he really had anything to do with it? Well, of course, this comes from because he always blamed everything else for inflation going up and said it was really nothing to do with him. It was all world events, etc., etc. But has taken a lot of the credit for it coming down. Samuel.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the Bank of England is probably the most significant stakeholder when it comes to controlling inflation, but there are things that Rishi Sunak has done, particularly around public sector pay and making sure that there was some restraint around that. I mean, he hasn't, succumbed to the pressures from junior doctors for a 35% pay rise, for example. There's things he's done around public spending. And so I think Rishi Sunak can take some credit, but ultimately the reality is that the Bank of England is the most serious and most important player when it comes to controlling inflation.
Now, as the Liberal Democrat Treasury spokesperson, Susan, what's your view on this?
Well, I agree that the Bank of England is the main player when it comes to dealing with inflation. But I also, I think what's made people feel angry is this sort of sense of complacency. We've got inflation back down to 2% for now. Everybody expects it to go back up again in the autumn. But we got inflation. So it's sort of like the pain is over. It isn't. That's not how people are feeling. And it's the fact that Rishi Sunak can't see through that to understand what it's like every day for people and the choices that they're making.
Yeah, it's hard when you're a billionaire.
That's, but I mean, I think there are people who probably can be billionaires and feel their way through, but there's some people who just can't get through and understand what that actually feels like. And that, I think, is why so many people are saying, this doesn't make too much difference. They're also cross, quite frankly, that he took credit. That's when it came down, but refused to take responsibility when it went up. And people aren't stupid.
But was it his fault? Was it?
I think a lot of the poor decisions he made.
We spent over £400 billion in response to the pandemic. He didn't start the war.
How much of that went
we
to
had
Tory donors?
Trust,
the price of oil was not Rishi Sunak's
one of the greatest contributors to inflation.
A contributor.
But all countries had increased inflation during that period, didn't they? It wasn't just us.
They did, but for us, it has far more impact.
Inflation is much lower than most other countries now.
But the impact on our cost of living isn't.
Yeah.
So we still are barely back up at pre-pandemic levels. Almost everybody else is way above pre-pandemic levels. An element of it, I have to say to you, is that the damage that Brexit has done to the economy, which everybody shies away from actually talking about. And Rishi Sunak takes a great deal of responsibility for that particular position. So, I mean, we've had there's been a lot of self-harm that's happened thanks to this government. And part of that has been a really major, that's a contributor to the rise in the cost of living. And that's what people see, not inflation.
I'm slightly playing devil's advocate here, but could he not say, well, if you look at the inflation rates of most of our competitors, they are now above us. We are very much at the low end. Germany, Italy, France, they're all above us.
But at the price of having a much lower level of quality of life for the people who live here. So people can't buy what they used to buy. The number of families that you talk to generally, if I'm not going out and doing canvassing, but I'm going out and talking to people more broadly. So the number of people who are not taking a holiday, the number of people who are worried about, can they do a nice birthday party for the children? And those are the well-off people. That's people who, are very close to the edge.
These are the people with Sky Television.
Exactly. Are having to use a food bank, which is something that they never wanted to do. They thought of themselves as people who might contribute to a food bank, not have to go there.
No, I absolutely agree. This is what's happening to working people, having to use food banks. And to be quite frank, people don't care. People don't care, just as you heard, because they can't afford to do the weekly shopping the way that they used to. So, going around boasting about having about 2% inflation it's just not going to cut it with people because no one's seeing their living standards change. No one's seeing things getting better. Wages are not increasing.
Well, they are. Wages are going up by 6%. That's 3 times the rate of inflation.
But it's not good enough to meet the cost of living. At the end of the day, if it's a real terms, just because the numbers actually go up, it doesn't mean that your wages are increasing in real terms, and that's what you need. You need it to increase in real terms to keep up with your rent, to keep up with your household bills, and to buy food. At the end of the day, The Tories cannot take credit for this and say that they're actually changing anybody's lives here.
But there are some prices which are coming down now. I mean, Rachel Reeves today has been saying, well, just because inflation's come down, that doesn't mean to say that prices aren't going up. Of course they are in some areas, food, for example, but energy costs are coming down, petrol costs, diesel costs are coming down.
But is it making a massive difference to people's everyday?
Well, I think if you get a 4% pay rise and inflation's 2%, then by its very nature, you would have to say that increases someone's standard of living.
But if everything else has already gone up and everybody's feeling the pinch anyway, and it was so unaffordable, before, it doesn't make a massive difference. Like, we have to acknowledge that this is the first government that we've come into, or the first government that we had for ages, where living standards are worse at the end of the government than the beginning.
But they would say, well, that's partly because of COVID. It's partly because of the effects of the war in Ukraine. That both of those things are outside their control.
Every other major economy similar to ours has been able to get themselves through. Why are we still stuck? Because we've had awful leadership.
But we have higher growth than others now. 0.7% in the first quarter of this year is higher than, I think, any other member of the G7 bar one.
But you can say all of this. How much of that is really affecting people's everyday? How much of that is being felt by people in the various areas that some people hope to represent following the election?
If Labour get in, you're going to come back here in 6 months' time and you're going to be quoting arguments like the ones I've just put to you, say, well, this is all down to the Labour Party.
No, I'm going to be completely honest with you and say that there is no way that when we come in, we're going to be able to have a magic wand and fix everything. It's not going to happen. Obviously, we're going to defend our corner. I'm a Labour person. I'll defend my corner. Perhaps a bit better than Sam's been able to defend his corner today.
Oh, come on. Don't have a go at Sam.
Why? Why not?
Let's go to Rachel.
I was just going to say, obviously, Bank of England, biggest contributor to bringing inflation down. But if Rishi Sunak has contributed at all, one of the reasons he's not getting any credit is because of Liz Truss, obviously, and the huge criticisms she made of institutions and the credibility that she's ruined for the Conservatives on the economy, basically. So I think it's difficult for Rishi Sunak to make any of the arguments that you would normally make at this time.
This is just a question that's randomly occurred to me. Of all of the 5 different Prime Ministers since 2010, who is most to blame for the fact that the Conservative Party finds itself where it does today?
That's a tough one. Can we rank them in order?
If you want to, yeah. We love a list on this programme.
You know, when we came in, when I was in Boris Johnson and we had the election and the manifesto, I think there was a really clear focus on how we could deal with some of the big structural challenges that we have, right? Including levelling up left behind towns, but also how we go for growth, etc. But unfortunately, to quote Howard Macmillan, events, their boy, events, is probably what has led to, or the most significant factor that has led to where we are today.
So which one of those 5 Prime Ministers is most culpable?
But I'm going to blame events. I'm going to sound like a politician.
Yeah, you are sounding like a politician. So let's go to a real one.
Right, no. Let me answer it. In that case, let me answer it. Honestly, I think everyone. Well, in fact, every single one of those Prime Ministers has had a part to play. I think when David Cameron led the Remain campaign and lost, and led a campaign, frankly, that could have been more positive. I think had he remained, things, sorry to the pun, as Prime Minister, then perhaps things would have been better, because I think of all the Prime Ministers that we've had since 2010, bluntly, he is the most competent. And then I think every single one of those Prime Ministers after... I like Theresa May a lot, but I think she had a really, really challenging wicket to bat. And then after Theresa, I think Boris made a lot of mistakes during the pandemic. There's a lack of professionalism, bluntly, which led to his demise. And then Rishi, in my opinion, shouldn't have resigned as Chancellor, because he lost a lot of credibility as a character within the Conservative circles, but also actually Boris made him Chancellor. I think it was completely wrong for him then to walk away. He should have gone down with Boris, bluntly. And Liz is obviously a disaster. And so everybody has had a part to play.
Okay.
But I go back to the point that David Cameron leaving in 2016 for me was probably the most significant factor.
Belle?
I think I'd have to go with Sam on this one, actually, except for the part where you said David Cameron was the most competent, because if he was the most competent, then gosh.
Well, if you had to pick one, okay, of those five, which is the most competent? You have to pick one.
I have to pick one. Well, what's going to happen?
You'll never be invited back.
Go on, pick one. you want to pick Cameron?
No, I don't.
But my personal favourite is, I have to say, Theresa May. I think in terms of character, she is the person whose heart was always in the right place.
Okay, let's go for her.
Well, you two are agreeing a lot, aren't you?
No, by a very, very
Rachel.
small margin.
Which question am I in?
What question were we doing? Is it disappeared off the...
Which Prime Minister's most to blame for the Conservatives' current position?
Yeah.
No,
it wasn't a question. It was one that I made up.
It's a toughie. I think David Cameron made an awful lot of mistakes. Actually, I think when the 2016 Scottish independence referendum was 2014 independence referendum was won for no. I think he took the wrong message from that, and you could rerun Brexit, but I think he probably thought he was going to be lucky and made a lot of bad decisions after that. Whoever did Liz Truss did the most damage in the shortest amount of time, but I think you have to say Boris Johnson probably has caused the most. If you're going to ask a voter, your average voter, as to which Prime Minister that makes them angriest, it's definitely Boris Johnson, because it's it's party game.
Or Liz Truss.
If all five of them walked down a high street now, Boris Johnson would be the only one that would be mobbed.
100%.
That's true. But he also annoys the most people.
I just feel I'm looking at a Conservative funeral here, and I really shouldn't intrude on
But you're going to anyway.
I think if
we can come on to which is the best Liberal Democrat leader in a moment, if you like.
Oh. But when I look at the range of them, every one of them have made a really monumental mistake. And the one I have
is there
the
any
most
Prime Minister that
sympathy for,
hasn't?
Well, yes, but monumental. No, I mean, it's the end of you when you finally do that. I mean, whether it was Gordon Brown, Tony Blair with Iraq. I mean, he won
the election after that.
I know he did, but it was still a terrible mistake. Of all the ones I have sympathy with, it would indeed be Theresa May, because I think at least it wasn't ego that drove her on. It wasn't a sense of arrogance that drove her on. I think she may have called some things wrongly, but she called some things wrongly without that trying to structure them to be somehow her moment of glory. And I respect that.
Yeah, I think Theresa May probably is the one that took public service the most seriously out.
Yes, that's a good way of expressing it.
If only the Liberal Democrats had backed her Brexit deal, things could have been so different.
I remain a Remainer, and I will till the end of my life.
Somebody says here, incredulous that you just giggled at the mention of food banks. I certainly did not.
Oh.
But anyway. Right, we are going to come to some more very good questions in just a moment. It's 8:47.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
Gordon in Hampstead says, far too kind to Theresa May. Read the Tim Shipman book. That's the second mention Tim Shipman's book has got on the programme tonight. It's very good, and I tend to agree with you on you don't come out of reading that book thinking better of Theresa May, it has to be said. Right, next question is from Joshua in Edinburgh. Hi, Joshua.
Hi, are you all right?
Yeah, what would you like to ask?
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on something you said earlier, actually. There was a caller that phoned in and said he was going to think about sitting at home, not voting. And you rightly seemed quite outraged at that. As you should be. I would feel the same. But then you almost encouraged a spoiled ballot. And I feel like that's almost worse than not voting at all. I was just wondering what the panel thought of spoiling ballots, and actually, is that better or worse than not voting at all?
Well, my argument was that it's a dereliction of your civic duty if you don't vote. But if you can't bring yourself to vote for any of the candidates on the ballot paper, at least you can get off your backside and go down the polling station and spoil your ballot paper. You've actually taken part in the democratic process. That was my argument. Susan Kramer.
Yes, I think I'm more with your caller than I am with you on this one, Iain. Spoiling a ballot paper just seems a piece of gesture politics, and politics is way too serious. It affects our lives. I just think you have to make that decision, don't you? Somebody is going to be in charge, that you have to decide what contribution you will make to them being in charge or not being in charge.
But if the choice is not doing anything, i.e. not voting, not even bothering to go to vote, or spoiling a ballot paper, I'd have thought that was the lesser of two evils.
I suppose you could. I mean, there's not much in it, I think. I just know the number of times when you're there at the count and you're trying to sort out the spoiled ballot paper, work out, did they really mean this, or is that what they meant? And, hours get spent on looking at those ballot papers trying to
can be quite funny, though, can't they?
They can be hilarious. They can also be completely unprintable.
Are you thinking what I'm thinking?
They can be very unprintable. And you think somebody that creative to write the unprintable ones really, I'm sure, could have made a sensible vote.
Rachel.
I've got nothing against spoiling your ballot. I think it might help you get some frustration off your chest, even if you can't bring yourself to vote for any one party. But yeah, everyone should go and vote, obviously.
Because the thing is, everybody has more sympathy with one party than another. Nobody's going to agree 100%. I mean, I'm sure you don't agree with 100% of the Labour manifesto, but you probably agree with 75, 80% of it, and you wouldn't agree with that percentage of any other party manifesto, so therefore you vote Labour. Similar with all the other parties. I mean, you'd be a very odd person to agree with every single thing that a political party put forward. So there must be one that appeals to somebody, even if it's not the one that they normally vote for.
You're right, there probably will be, but then some people can't bring themselves to do it at all. And I think it's important that everybody takes part. And if the only way you're going to take part is by expressing your dissatisfaction with everybody, then perhaps you should just do it. But I think there are so many different things that need to change with our electoral system overall. There needs to be better civic education too. And also perhaps people thinking if they don't like the options or if they want to have more influence in their party, understanding better how they can join it, be candidates themselves and what they can do to influence the policies there.
Yeah. I think this is an argument for proportional representation.
Oh my! We've lasted 53 minutes, Susan.
Yes.
You did very well, may I say.
Thank you. But I suspect many people who spoil a ballot are thinking, if I vote the way I would like to vote, it's meaningless.
Yeah.
And it's a protest against that, some of it.
Well, proportional representation could open doors for extremists, of course. But, when Belle and I, we've known each other since our student politics days, and in those moments we used to have the reopen nominations option, so maybe that's something that might
have none of the above at the bottom of the ballot paper.
Ron, I used to vote for Ron very regularly.
Instead of me. That's what he used to do. He used to vote for Ron instead of me.
Yeah, of course. And I would today if I lived in Streatham. I'm joking. Kind of. But
you see, now you've gone and done it. Now I'm going to have to mention all the candidates.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. It's not actually called that, I know, it's part of it.
Okay, sorry, forgive me.
So Corey has now got the task within the next 6 minutes of putting the candidates on my screen.
Whilst you're doing it,
you won't be invited back, Belle.
So when my wife goes to vote, sometimes the best I can hope and pray for is that she spoils her ballot,
She's going to vote Labour.
Well, no, she's not going to vote for him.
I didn't say she's going to vote for Labour, but
she's a very clever woman.
But she has her own views, and sometimes when we are having this negotiation, I feel like that is the best I can hope for. And so
you should do what my grandfather did in the 1951 general election, when he locked his wife, my grandmother, in the toilet for the entire day, so she couldn't go and vote Liberal.
Oh,
that's not. I mean,
what a great lady.
I'm not advocating that you do that, by the way. But
I'm not sure if I would be able to live to tell the time.
The candidates in it's not Streatham and Croydon North, is it?
No, that's somebody else.
That's a different one.
Sam mentioned the wrong seat.
That's somebody else.
So does that mean you have to do it for?
Oh no, we
both
don't have
seats?
to do that. If that's not your seat, I think that was in your seat.
Say the president.
Okay,
there is no constituency called that anymore.
I'm glad we sorted that out. Joshua, are you happy with the answers you've had?
Yeah, I just think it's a bit of a strange take. I think if you're not going to vote at all, then don't bother voting. Going down to spoil a ballot wastes the time of everybody in the polling booth, but wastes the time of everybody at the count as well. And you're not proving a point. I've been at a lot of counts. If you go on the screen, you have a laugh at them, you move them on, and just think, what an idiot. It's not proving a point. You're not forming a protest. You're just wasting everybody's time.
Okay. Thank you very much. Mohammed is in Southall. Hello, Mohammed.
Hello, good evening all. Just a quick one to the panel or everyone or anyone that can answer this. The Conservatives failed in their promise regarding the leasehold system, where they said they would abolish it by scrapping ground rent and allowing leaseholders to manage the services themselves. They've done a quick wash-up towards the end of Parliament in May. So what is the answer from both Labour and Liberal Democrat perspectives, please? Thank you.
No, I think it is in the Conservative manifesto. They're promising to do all of this again. Susan Kramer.
I have no idea why that got lost in wash-up, because I wasn't involved with that range of decisions, but we felt very strongly that it should have been passed.
Belle?
I agree. It absolutely should have been passed. Leasehold is a complete trap, and it's causing so many problems. It's such a huge broken promise from the Conservatives on this. So I'd hope in the next government it's brought up very quickly.
Is it in the Labour manifesto?
Doesn't mean that it's not going to be done.
It's in the Tory manifesto.
No, I'm just asking. I don't know whether it is or not.
Doesn't mean that it's not going to be done.
It's in the Tory
I think it was a government decision not to include it in the wash-up, and I don't know why they took that position. It seemed to me just extraordinary. I think everyone was shocked, quite frankly.
There was broad consensus, but not necessarily within the Conservative Party, but cross-party consensus. So, fingers crossed. It is an important piece of work, and Sean Bailey in the London Assembly, or now in the House of Lords, it has been doing a great job being a Conservative voice for this. So hopefully, after the election, it does happen.
Rachel.
I think there's broad consensus, isn't there, across party? It's going to happen sooner or later. But unfortunately, because of how Parliament ended quite early there and rumbled into a general election, it's happening later rather than sooner.
Right, let's go to our fun question. Let's see if there's any consensus on this one. It's from Julie in Durham. Rishi Sunak defended eating Twixes and Haribos a fair bit while he's out campaigning during his LBC phone-in this morning. What is your sweet treat vice on long and stressful days? Rachel.
Sugar-free Red Bull teamed with flapjack.
Sugar-free Red Bull. Does it work?
So you get a double whammy of the full-on caffeine with then followed by the rush of the
sugar-free.
and then well, because I can't have both, and I have the sugar rush from the flapjack. So yeah,
nice.
Susan.
That's my rather gross combo.
I'm afraid my great weakness are chocolate-covered raisins, and I try and the more doors I knock on, the more leaflets I deliver, the more chocolate-covered raisins I'm allowed. So that's a
the leaflets
true incentive.
Get all chocolatey.
If anyone has a stained leaflet, I'm so sorry.
Belle.
Peanut M&Ms. Oh, well, I hate the raisins. Oh.
Yeah, M&Ms.
Peanut M&Ms. No, just wrong. Sam?
So usually fruit gums, which are not very good for my teeth, of course. Or if I know anyone that's going to the States, and I've done this with Belle quite a few times, I always order Chips Ahoy cookies. And if you don't
bring him cookies back from the States.
He insists on it.
They are so inferior.
For the minis, they're very addictive.
Like, ask me an important question. Did you buy the cookies? Did you buy the cookies? You can get them in the airport, you know.
Yeah, there you go. They always arrive. I'm persistent.
No accounting for taste, is there? Well, thank you all very much indeed to Baroness Susan Kramer, Samuel Kasumu, Bell Ribeiro-Addy and Rachel Wearmouth. We have on Monday's Cross Question Labour peer Baroness Helena Kennedy and the author and political commentator Yasmin Alibhai-Brown, never knowingly uncontroversial. So coming up in the next hour, 29,000 people during COVID were fined for breaching the law in various ways. Today, the former Justice Secretary, who was Justice Secretary who oversaw the courts during the pandemic, he's called for an amnesty for all of these people who were given criminal convictions for breaking COVID rules. He wants their slate wiped clean so that their convictions won't hamper them if they are mentioned, if they're trying to get a new job. What's your view on this? I have to say my instinctive reaction is if you committed a crime, why should you get a pardon for this? I can think of many other things you might get a pardon for, but not this. But I suspect there are many of you who will disagree with me.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock, the Prime Minister has committed to serving a full term in opposition, even as a backbencher if he doesn't win the election.